How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world, and we'd like to tell you about them.
NDC Oslo will be May 21st through the 25th. Go to ndcoslo.com to register.
NDC Copenhagen is happening August 27th through the 31st. Go to ndccopenhagen.com for more information.
NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. The early bird discount for NDC Porto ends July 21st. Go to ndcporto.com to register.
And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com. Hey, welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And, boy, it's been a while since we recorded, but we're kind of recording this right up to the wire, aren't we?
I love it when we have a show the week of. But, we let the hopper get a little low. I blame myself. I was traveling a lot.
Well, can't blame you for traveling.
Yeah, I went down to New Zealand, Australia. Then I came home for like 2 days. And then I went over to Wales. So I do not know what time zone I'm in. It's not a thing. I got back yesterday.
I've got a little story for you, and that is the construction has started on my new home studio, which I'm affectionately calling PWOP 3.0.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So this is in that giant garage you have.
The giant garage. Yeah, it's a 1,200 square foot garage, and I'm taking up more than half of it with in the back. And I'm going to give it the same treatment that we did in New London.
In the original.
It's going to, yeah.
You're going to go red again?
Oh, yeah, same material and everything.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so they're in there now pulling out the insulation, and I'm going to document it on our Facebook page.
That's cool.
PWOP Productions. All right, enough chit-chat. Let's start off with Better Know Framework. Well, we all know what the Poly project is. If you've been listening to this show, and if you haven't used it, you really ought to check it out. Poly is a tool that you can use for resilience strategies. So what happens when transient errors happen? Your network goes down or some network endpoint is busy or something like that. We started talking about it on .NET Rocks, and then AppV Next became a shepherd of it. Then it got into the .NET Foundation, and then Poly went into .NET 2.1 with the HTTP Client Factory. So needless to say, it's been a few years. We actually haven't had many updates to it for the past couple of years.
There's also a point where it's done, right?
Well, you'd think it's done, but there's a bit of non-trivial technical debt, including lack of cancellation tokens and in some operations, a lack of full async support for all callbacks, and some performance issues. So what happened is the .NET team built a prototype version of Poly that simplifies Poly's API surface area with a single iResilience strategy interface that's responsible for executing all the Poly scenarios and addresses the performance issues with excellent results. In fact, in the early tests, the new changes resulted in CPU overhead reduction of 80%.
That's nice numbers.
Yeah. And additionally, the proof of concept significantly reduced allocations by large factors. So these are all great optimizations. What's interesting is that it's completely backward compatible, and it hasn't happened yet. So what happens is Joel Hewlin has written this blog post that we're going to link to, and this is 1838. So if you go to 1838.pwop.me, you'll see the link. And we're looking for feedback about version 8, which is the up and coming version with all these changes. And so that's what we want. We want you to take it for a spin, check it out and let us know, what you like, what you don't like about it.
I love me a V8.
Yes. So it's really exciting. And, I hope, people can jump in and contribute. Who's talking to us today, Richard?
I grabbed a comment off of show 1794. That's the one we did with Jemima Abu, and we were, I think we were at NDC in London. This is back in early 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, we were talking about different front end frameworks.
Yep.
From vanilla JavaScript all the way through Blazor.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh Davishaw had this great comment. He said, I've been working almost exclusively with web components in Blazor for almost 2 years now, and the two work really well together.
Mm-hmm.
I've even gone so far as to wrap some of my web components in Blazor components to augment them with server-side code.
Mm-hmm.
Fancy.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, I went down the web component route because when the orders came from on high to use Blazor only a few months after the first release, those were early days, I wasn't convinced it was going to hold up under load. I wanted a framework agnostic escape hatch. And I came upon the, at the time, new Microsoft Fast Element library. Luckily, Blazor did hold up, and we've been massively productive with our new stack. And then he goes on to say, y'all should interview Rob Eisenberg or someone from the Fast team. They're doing a lot of great stuff with web and Blazor components for Fluent. And by the way, Flash is not dead.
Yes, it is. Bite your tongue. Don't believe it.
You can use Flash application code to publish to Canvas with an adapter library called Create.js.
Yes,
and
but
has
why?
nearly the same syntax as ActionScript 3 because everybody loves ActionScript, Carl. Everybody loves it.
My God.
I used this to make computer-based training modules at my last gig only 3 years ago, and it worked really, really well.
I just have flashbacks to, speaking of flashbacks,
Did you say flashbacks? You didn't really.
I did. I have flashbacks to my stepdaughter in high school in the 90s talking about how her web class was all Flash.
There you go.
They didn't even talk about HTML.
Well, it was easy.
And I wanted to go down there and wring that guy's neck.
Well, people were looking for easy ways to do things. There's no two ways about it,
Yeah.
back at the time. So, Josh, thank you so much for your comment. And a copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And you can follow us on Twitter if you want, but we really like you to follow us on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
And send us a toot. And check it out. Check out Mastodon.
Doesn't even matter if it's funny.
It's pretty good. Yeah, just send us a toot. Some guy just today said, hey, have you been saying send us a toot? So here it is. I'm checking out Mastodon. Thanks for the reference. Okay, let's bring on our guests. Steve Sanderson doesn't need any introduction. He would say, yeah, I'm Steve. I'm a developer at Microsoft. But what he really is the inventor of frickin' Blazor and all other sorts of cool things. And Javier Nelson is with him, and he's a senior software engineer on the ASP.NET team. Welcome, guys. I can't imagine why you came around.
Hi there, Carl. Hello, Richard. I'm glad to be back and chatting to you again. Javier, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Javier. I work on Blazor and ASP.NET with Steve, and I'm happy to be here.
Steve, how did you become so humble? Were you always this way?
I think I've practiced for many years to become as humble as I am now, and it's definitely one of the greatest accomplishments I think in human history.
It's astounding. It's astounding. I mean, so were you like much more braggadocious, like in school?
I was a very, very quiet person at school.
Okay.
I didn't. Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's not why you're here. We're here to talk about what, Blazor United or something like that?
Yeah. So you've heard of it. What do you think so far?
I have. Well, I haven't played with the bits, but everything that I see, I love. And I can't wait. Can't wait for the first preview.
So we better tell people what the heck Blazor United is.
Yeah, what is it?
Okay. Javier, do you want to explain the idea?
Sure. So right now, when you do Blazor, you have to choose between server and client. And the idea of Blazor United is essentially removing that choice that you need to make ahead of time and enabling you to make that decision on a more granular level, not at the level of your app, but on a per component basis. So we are trying to enhance Blazor with server-side rendering, similar to how you do MVC or Razor Pages. And on top of that, being able to render interactive islands of functionality within your app, so that you can have as an application that starts as a server render app that has a more modern take on server-side rendering with things like streaming rendering, and that then can evolve and continue on its path to richer interactivity through either server components or WebAssembly, and essentially trying to avoid forcing you to make a choice and letting you choose whatever fits best for your scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the thing that catches everyone's ear the most, I think, is this auto mode where you start as a Blazor server application, and then in the background, the WebAssembly DLLs are loading. And when they're loaded, it switches over to a WebAssembly component or page. But I don't want to glaze over the server-side rendering thing. And I kind of want to talk about that and how it differs from MVC and how it differs from Blazor server.
Yeah.
Can we do a why do you care? Like, is this about speeding up the startup time?
Yeah.
Is that what this really comes down to?
So I guess one way to think about it at a very high level is that we want Blazor to be suitable for all web UI scenarios, which it isn't today, right? If we're honest, Blazor is great for certain situations, but not all of them prior to .NET 8. Like, it's great for richly interactive sites that are so rich that it's worth downloading a .NET runtime into someone's browser and making them wait for, a second or 2 seconds or something before it's ready. Or for scenarios which are really rich and you want to run them interactively on a server. And that's cool. But that's not all of web development. That's probably 50% of web development or something. And the other 50% is you just want to send some HTML to people's browsers as fast as possible with the lowest possible server overhead. Right. And it's a stateless request response thing. And Blazor has not been suitable for that in the past, but we are greedy and we want to eat all web UI scenarios. So we're coming for the other 50%.
We would like all the web, please.
Yeah.
All right. I hear that humility kind of fading away right now.
But it's not about us. It's about the customers, right? It's about the developers. So people are spending their time building their web applications. And at the moment, they're forced into this choice up front. Like, am I orienting stuff around stateless server rendering, or am I orienting it around interactive SPA type programming? And because you have to make that choice, like Javier said, you choose once at the beginning, you're then kind of stuck with that, and you can't really cross that chasm easily. But what we've realized and what we've seen from some other similar technologies is that it is possible to have one UI technology that will cover both of these scenarios, so that you only have to do your work once. You write your component and it can work in either this interactive mode or the stateless server mode. And then we can do all the advanced stuff on top of that Javier listed a bunch of stuff where, we have different islands. Some of them are interactive, some of them are not, some of a server, some are WebAssembly, some dynamically switch from one to the other. All these different advanced things. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that we want to cover all the scenarios with a single programming model, single UI technology.
Is there a case for a mixed mode? I mean, isn't ideally everything client, you just, as long as you don't have to wait for it?
There are advantages, right? What advantages?
There's advantages to both, aren't there? There's advantages to the server side in that you don't have to hide your secrets. You don't have to have an API layer, for example. Yeah,
you have your data and your state already available on the server. You don't have to go through all the hassle of HTTP client, all the things that you need to deal with, like authorization, all that stuff, because it already is on the server. So one of the things that people misses to realize in many cases when using Blazor server is that it's really, really convenient because you have everything right at the top of your hand. The moment you move to WebAssembly or to other SPA framework, then you have this layer where you need to be serializing everything. And as much as you can try to smooth over that, you still need to think about it. So if you have something that is highly interactive, then it makes sense, for example, to be WebAssembly. If you are handling some operation on the server, then it might make sense for you to be able to plug in a component that does everything on the server.
So Richard's question is really valid here in that, okay, I see the benefit to Blazor server, but if you're going to end up at Blazor WebAssembly anyway, why would you need to start with Blazor server?
Well, there's a couple of advantages. One of them is the startup time that we've alluded to. So with WebAssembly, if the user's got a fast network connection, then hopefully the app can get started within a couple of seconds. But, I can't absolutely promise that, especially if they're on a slow network connection.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a Blazor server app is going to start instantly. There's nothing really to download.
Yeah.
So you've got that startup time. The other thing is all these architectural advantages that Javier mentioned, where you're trying to talk to your database. You can just do that, right? Your code's already on the server. It can just talk to the database straight away. No need to bother writing API layers. It's just a very, very productive environment to be in.
But if it's going to eventually end up as a WebAssembly application in auto mode, you're still going to have that API layer and all of the things that we are required for a WebAssembly application, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you are right. Yeah. So if your intention is to have an application that genuinely works in both modes and is able to switch between them, then you do have to be concerned about both server-side and client-side concerns. And at that point, it's a pure startup time optimization. Yeah.
Yeah, there's almost a philosophical question of here is which would consume less bandwidth, staying strictly server side and, interacting the client back and forth versus getting all the client down and just interacting at the API level. Because I could almost see us wanting to be different configurations based on bandwidth constraints or bandwidth cost constraints.
Yeah. There's tons of trade-offs to make. There's the bandwidth, there's the startup CPU time, there's how much time and memory you're consuming on the server, there's how much state you might need to transfer, there's the latency of UI interactions. They all put you at different points on preferring server or client-side code. And we can't decide for all applications how it should be. And that's part of the goals with this new programming model is that developers can make that decision for themselves on a very fine-grained basis. It doesn't have to be the entire project is just server-side or the entire thing is WebAssembly. But you could have individual components where you say, this one needs super low latency interaction, like a text editor or something, and something else, which is just like a list of products. Maybe that's only going to update once in a few minutes. You would just run that server side.
All right. Getting back to my question about the differences between server side rendering and MVC and Blazor server. What are the differences there?
Yep. So Blazor United or server side rendering Blazor is an equivalent model to MVC and Blazor pages in the sense that everything is server side rendered. There is no JavaScript. The browser is the one talking to the server, and the main advantage of using Blazor components over MVC or Blazor pages is that then that component can also work on WebAssembly and Blazor server, and you're using a single component model or a single programming model to target all three scenarios. So the goal here, as Steve mentions, is to try and reach the broader set of people possible, and pretty much nothing beats server rendered apps in terms of getting data to your customer and being able to do simple interactions.
So what's the difference between a Razor component in a Blazor server application that takes some data and some HDL and spits it down, and just server-side rendering in Blazor United?
Yeah. So the difference is the interaction. The interaction in a Blazor server app happens completely on the server. We literally delegate the event that happens in the browser and send it to the server, while in a server render app, is the browser actually using the standard HTML and web technologies to send a form post that then we traditionally process like you would do in MVC or Razor pages.
Okay. So there's no circuit, I guess you could say, and just,
Exactly.
Right. That's the circuit happens and the circuit is the SignalR connection plus some metadata around it. They call it a circuit, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so there's a circuit when you have a server-side Blazor component or page, but not when you have either WebAssembly, obviously, or server-side rendering.
Exactly.
And as we talked about this on Blazor Train, Steve, I was concerned about, multiple circuits with multiple components, and there's only ever one circuit, and it's either on or it's not, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And the intention is that we have that circuit for the minimal amount of time that we need to. So as a user navigates around, if they happen to go to a location that has a server rendered component, then a circuit will start up. And as soon as they navigate away from that, it can go away, which means that the amount of time that you spend holding open a connection to the server is kept as small as it can, and that reduces the costs for the web developer. But it also gives you certain resilience benefits as well. So whenever you don't have a circuit, you don't have to worry about things like, what if they go into a tunnel and lose their 3G connection or whatever it is. It just becomes a traditional website as soon as the circuit goes away.
Back to HTTP keep alive.
So let's talk about that dreaded pale white reload page that happens when the circuit gets broken. In a Blazor server application, if you lose the circuit for whatever reason, internet goes down, or Steve said you go through a tunnel, it tries to reconnect, and if it can't, then you have to refresh the page or whatever. So let's say in the scenario where we have mixed things, maybe we have one page that's a server, Blazor server page, another page that's server-side rendered or WebAssembly or whatever. You'd only run into that issue if you went to that page. Well, what if you have a rendered page that has just a component, a Blazor component that's a Blazor server component on it, and you lose the circuit? Does the whole page go white, or is it just that little component area, or does it?
We don't know yet, right? We haven't implemented that, right?
I don't know
if you've got a design in mind for that. I think it's a bit of an open question right now.
Wow, that's cool.
I was also going to say, so it must work perfectly because it isn't implemented yet.
No, you should understand, and listeners should understand, that we are at an early stage of design right now. We've got a good prototype, and we did some cool demo videos. But the real implementation we've only just got started on in the last month, and there's tons of open questions, and we are looking for a lot of feedback on many aspects of the design. People can follow along on GitHub and see the work as it goes in with PRs, and we often write things in the PR description, which is like, open question, what should happen in blah, blah, blah. And we it's great when people come along and give us their feedback on that. And that thing that you've just raised there is exactly the sort of thing that we still are, design is pending on that.
Right.
And you're targeting the .NET 8 timeframe, so November of 2023.
That's right, yeah.
Yep.
And I say targeting genuinely, say, like, some features will make it and some features will not. Like, software is complicated.
And is there a preview out yet, or?
No, the first preview that you're going to see something of this is .NET 8 Preview 3. I don't know the release date, but we've just gone through the code complete point for that at the end of last week. So it's probably a month away or something. I don't know. Javier, do you know when it ships?
It ships on a pretty regular cadence. I don't have the exact date, but every month. I used to be more worried about .NET previews, but I'm not anymore because I know it ships every month.
They're like clockwork, Yeah,
you stop having that pressure to get everything done for a given release. When you know there's just another release coming. Better to make it right than to make the deadline.
You really want to get it like in Preview 7 rather than in Preview 8 or RC, but yes.
I didn't have the cojones to actually do the nightly build and try it out.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't really recommend most people to bother trying to get the prototype code running, because you do have to build the whole ASP.NET Core repo, and it's not that easy, to be honest with you. But hopefully it's only a few weeks away until some of the first parts of server rendering show up. It'll be fairly basic in the first Preview 3. We won't have streaming rendering or even the ability to put interactive components on the page, but you'll start seeing some of the core APIs come together.
And this is being built in the ASP.NET Core GitHub repository. Like, that's where I see the issues. Like, that's where folks should be going if they want to participate.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to make sure I include that link. It's like, look, folks, here it is being built out public. Like, you can be a part of it.
So what are you guys doing in the area of performance, with .NET 8 and with Blazor United? Are we going to enable some scenarios that can be more performant than .NET 7?
Sure. Depending on how you look at performance, we obviously do performance testing on pretty much everything that we build and ship. But generally in first releases, you're not going to see us to focus a lot on performance, and we focus more on features. However, if you think about performance as in user metrics, you're going to see a ton of improvement just by the fact that we are server rendering things.
Yes.
Because the time to first byte, the time to interactive, large contentful paint, and all the metrics that are defined generally for measuring the perf of the app I'm expecting them all to improve like significantly.
I imagine just using auto mode right out of the box is going to architecturally give you better performance.
Yeah,
that's right. But also the streaming rendering feature is potentially quite a significant one for that as well. So
right. Let's talk about that after the break. We'll be right back after these very important messages.
You know, Amazon AWS is a great home for your .NET applications. Whether you're looking to run your apps as serverless functions, have them run in containers, or you require the complete flexibility of virtualized hardware, you can do it all on AWS. .NET toolkits and templates guide you through build and deployment, or you can use your favorite infrastructure as code and CI/CD tools, including Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, and GitLab CI/CD. Loving Visual Studio, VS Code, or Rider? There's an AWS toolkit for each of them. Want to use familiar Microsoft SQL Server databases? You can with the Amazon Relational Database Service, which provides fully managed SQL Server databases that offer automatic scaling, failover, and snapshots. Once your .NET application is deployed, it can use any of the over 200 AWS services to extend its functionality. Interested in AI, IoT, machine learning, video processing, or transcription? Your .NET on AWS application can do it all. To learn more, go to aws.amazon.com/net.
All right, we're back. It's .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're talking to Steve and Javier about Blazor United. And you were just going to talk about streaming rendering, which is a new feature in Blazor United.
Yeah, that's right. So this is part of, as we move from a SPA-centric way of thinking about web programming to one that encompasses traditional request responses as well, we have to find ways of retaining the same benefits that SPA programming has had. And one of the benefits of SPA programming is, let's say that the landing page of your site involves making quite an expensive database query to get the data for like a list of .NET Rocks episodes, and you've done like 10 million by now, I understand. And so it takes a long time for that to come back. So with a SPA, traditionally, the user would get back like a skeleton of HTML that doesn't really contain anything initially, and then it would contain some script that makes it go and fetch stuff from from an API and then render this massive list. And so the UI shows up pretty quickly, right? It's empty initially, but it's still there. It's better than just a spinner that's empty. If you move to a pure server rendered mode, then what would happen by default if you don't do any further optimization is that the browser does the HTTP request to say, get me this homepage, and then you start doing your database query, and then you wait for like 10 seconds for the database to reply, and the user doesn't see anything at all. The HTTP request is just hanging open for that amount of time. Streaming rendering allows the server to send back the HTML straight away, or like a skeleton of it straight away, but keep the HTTP response open until that database query completes. And then it can send a further chunk of markup, which can then get attached to the page. So it can get merged into the DOM without having to do any further HTTP requests, without having to run a full SPA programming and rendering system. So you get that ability of a fast initial render, and with the ability still to patch additional data into it later. Does that make sense? I know it's a bit of an unfamiliar feature.
So under the hood, is it using iasync result to do your traditional streaming?
So on the .NET side, it's just using tasks. So the Blazor renderer has always kept track of what pending tasks there are associated with a renderer. That's how the existing pre-rendering system knows when to complete the response. So what we've changed really is, instead of waiting until all those tasks are finished before we send the response, we now just send the response straight away, but we don't close the actual connection for the response until the tasks have completed. And at that point, we do a further render and send a UI diff to the browser.
Hey, I want to go into that a little bit more, but because this just came to my mind, I got to tell you, Steve, I just went through about 6 hours of absolute pain and torture trying to get bindable properties working with an observable collection in a MAUI app just to bind. And then I did the same thing in Blazor in about 5 seconds. And it just goes to show you the power of this binding model, of this, the Blazor component model, and just how awesome it is. I can't thank you enough for inventing that.
Well, I'm glad that's working well for you.
Oh my God.
Cool.
I guess the real thing is XAML's just still a nightmare.
XAML's your friend.
I didn't say that. I said that as a person, Carl, not as a Microsoft anybody. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I'm not saying XAML, your friend, doesn't have emotional problems. Just XAML's your friend.
It's just hard. You know, the way XAML is all set up, there's just there's so much plumbing under the hood, I think. Yeah. It's just hard to nail. But anyway, so this I've been doing this kind of thing, this streaming rendering myself. Let's say from an API that's returning a whole bunch of things and, wrapping that API call in an AI async result. And then, just getting the data and then only, let's say that there's 1,000 items in a list, but my list is only 20, deep. So I can only show 20 at a time. So after I have the first 20, boom, I call status changed, everything re-renders, and it's like instant. And so then every other 100, let's say we do another render. So the list box sort of scroll bar starts getting wider and wider. I've been doing that, but it does take a little bit of work. And I think what I hear you saying is that, you don't have to do the work now. It'll just stream as the data comes back and is showable. It'll just show. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's right. So we've taken the existing async data loading pattern that people already use in their Blazor components, and we've simply made it so that you can put a flag. It's probably going to be an attribute, I think, on the component to say, I do streaming rendering. And simply by opting into that, it means that the server-side rendering will not wait for all those tasks to complete, but instead will send each subsequent chunk of rendering down as it occurs. To be clear, it's not a top to bottom thing where, we send an H1 element and then we don't render the next bit until we've got the rest of it. We do send everything in the document, and then we can patch changes into an arbitrary locations within the document as they occur.
So cool. Yeah. What has been the biggest challenge in designing this system?
Ooh, I don't know. You got some opinions, Javier? Probably working with me.
That's a tough one. No, I would say I'm harder to work with. I think I'm harder to work with. We are both two very opinionated people.
Yeah.
It's always fun to discuss things with Steve.
Did it start with just you guys though, or was it stuff that was gleaned from the repos, from the customers? What brought it on?
So it was really a lot of things coming from multiple places. There was a lot of feedback that I collected in this area over the years that somewhat raised the question of hey, what about all these other areas that we're not tackling?
Yeah.
And then Steve went on a journey to learn more about the area and came in and said, oh, there are actually many great things we can do here. And then the team started working together towards creating this vision, and that's more or less how it happened.
Steve, do you have a magic sauna at your house where you go out, and you just sweat it out and things come to you in a vision and,
yeah, after I've made the relevant sacrifices and, imbibed the right substances.
I've solved this problem. It was hard on the chickens.
Yeah. I always thought about this issue, but I just resigned myself to the fact, well, you kind of have to pick your horse, and you're either server side or client side, and that's it. And so it's very interesting.
We should give credit to some of the other technologies that have already been doing some of this. Okay. So within the JavaScript world, there's been a pretty big swing over to server-side rendering over the last year. And, it's not like they've all made an equal level of progress. Some of them have got a lot further than others. I think Next.js is probably the one that's covered the most ground and set a lot of the patterns that others have tried to copy. But you look at the the server-side toolkits for each of the different SPA frameworks, whether it's SvelteKit or whether it's Nuxt or other things like that. They've all attempted to do stuff in this area. So you could say in a way we're simply following a trend that's occurring. There's another more sort of perhaps optimistic way to look at it, which is that Blazor already has certain strengths in this area. Like we're already got a massive head start because we've got Blazor Server already. Right. We've got one of the strongest server web offerings that there is available. And so this was in fact actually a very natural thing for us to do, to take a bit of that inspiration and then see that we can go further in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, Microsoft has a long history of server-side rendering, right?
Yep. So
absolutely.
If you think about it, like, in many cases, the JavaScript world has gone into this journey of like going from the browser to the server. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of doing the opposite thing, which is we went from the server to the browser, and we're kind of both meeting in the middle from different angles, if you want to think it that way.
These are the healthy evolutions of an evolving platform space, right? That we try all the things.
Exactly. And the other thing that I would say is that if you go far back enough, you'll see that in the beginning, SPAs were not just an index HTML and some like JavaScript that loaded everything and did requests and all that stuff. The beginning of SPAs was really, here's my JavaScript, here's my component within my page that was server rendered. And that's kind of towards where we're going again, is about giving people more flexibility and more granularity into how they build their apps.
Yeah, between the magic of Ajax and inner HTML, suddenly, what do you want to do on the page?
Yeah.
Yes, we have been accused of reinventing web forms and update panel and jQuery and basically everything else. So yeah, all the different steps along the journey.
All those really great technologies that made it easier to develop.
Mm-hmm. But implemented with the new understanding and the new capabilities and the richer language that we have now. These are good oscillations. And to your point, and I grabbed links for like Next.js and SvelteKit and so forth. You're not alone. Lots of different groups of folks that care about web development are experimenting with tools in these exact same contexts.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you think that WebAssembly is getting its due respect these days, or are people still wary of it? Like, they bring up the S word, and not understanding that it's different than Silverlight. Do you still run into that?
I would say within the Microsoft communities, there is definitely some residual fear of the Silverlight days.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's a fairly small portion of the web ecosystem. Like, I would imagine that, a good 80% of web developers entered the industry after Silverlight was already finished, and they don't think about that. WebAssembly is not even a new technology. It's been in your browser since 2017, I think.
Yeah.
So like it's older than probably half of the web developers' careers by now.
So I just got to say it. If you're a Microsoft developer and you're afraid of WebAssembly, just educate yourself. There's nothing to fear here. Yeah.
Everything's going to be fine.
It's a standard.
Yeah.
It is.
It's a standard that everybody's implementing. Oh, hey, how about that news that Safari is finally getting a makeover? I bet you're happy about that. Safari is getting an update that they're going to fix like 123 issues, and the issues with progressive web applications are going to be addressed, and notifications and all these things.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, Safari has been a bit of an odd one out browser for a little while, but I've certainly seen they've been doing a ton of effort to try and correct that perception. I certainly see it.
Safari 15 seems to be the big one. Like, this is the one that's going to really play well.
It's going to be the one that we should have had 10 years ago.
Maybe not. Yeah.
All right. 5 years ago. Still, they were holding out for a while. All right. So auto mode. Basically, this is the mode you can pick for any component. You can pick whether it's going to be a server-side rendered or WebAssembly rendered or auto, which starts as server-side and then ends up as WebAssembly, right? And you do this with what? An attribute on the component?
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're looking at different ways of specifying how components should render. So the intention is that one, a component can say its own preference about how it renders. You can have an attribute that says like, I'm a server component, I'm WebAssembly, or I'm auto.
Right.
But as well as that, the person who consumes the component at the call site can specify what they want. So as you use a component, you can say render mode equals, and then you can override the component's own preference.
Wow.
Like the intent is that mostly components should not express an opinion about how they render.
Right.
They should be agnostic. They should be as flexible as they can to work anywhere. And then the person who uses it will just say what they want.
Yeah. So therefore, your components should be completely separate from your data layer, your API layer, and all of that stuff should exist outside your components, except maybe in your pages, right? I mean, a page has to decide that, right?
Well, that's an interesting point, right? Because yes, in one sense, yes, all that kind of separation is all a good thing. But in another sense, it's all kind of overhead. Like you're spending your time creating interfaces and abstractions and thinking about DI services and all that stuff. And, wouldn't it be better if you didn't have to think about any of that stuff? So we're trying to think about what kind of patterns around data loading or other platform specific features would enable people to just be more productive. And one of the key ones that we're looking at the moment is multi-targeting. So, up to now, if you wanted to have something that runs on WebAssembly, you had to have a special project that compiles for WebAssembly. Right. But we are looking in .NET 8 to have a way of multi-targeting your server project to say this is both server and WebAssembly. Mm-hmm. And then it will produce two separate builds, one for each of those environments. And then in your code, you can have an if server or if browser or if WebAssembly, whatever we call it. And so in your data loading logic, you can say something like if server, load it directly from a database with Entity Framework, else call an API endpoint, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to bother making an interface and doing extra abstractions.
Well, it'd be nice to use I would be using a repository pattern where I could implement, a repository interface and then have one that implements my API calls and have another one that implements my data services, right? And I'm using one when I'm on the server and one when I'm on the client. And if that interface holds up, I should just be able to swap them out depending on what environment I'm in, right?
Yeah, that is absolutely one way to do it. But wouldn't it be nicer if you didn't even have to bother? Like if you just literally put your data access logic in your component and you just said, if I'm on the server, then get it straight from the database. Otherwise, call some endpoint.
Okay. I guess you still have to do that. It's depending on where you do it, I suppose.
So it's a bit more about that, because if you think about it, when you add a repository, you need to have a set of data types that you define that become the contract.
You're right.
You normally have to put those in a separate assembly so that both things can reference
you're
it.
Right.
You need to have a bit much more ceremony than if you define everything on the same project. It gets compiled twice. And at that point, you don't have to add anything that you don't want. You want to do the repository, you can still do it, but you're not forced to.
So your solution, Steve, is within this Blazor United project, maybe instead of having in the template the shared folder where all your components go, maybe you have server-side components and WebAssembly components, and you can have the same component in there with the same interface. It's just that depending on where they run, they're going to be different under the hood. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's one way you could do it. Yeah. So actually, this is a very flexible system. So you could have that pivot on a per component basis. And we might do that with a file name convention. So you have my component.server and my component.WebAssembly. And, it will pick the right one. But it might not, it could be even more granular. You could just have my component.razor, and inside that, you can have a preprocessor directive that says this range of code is used for server and this other range for WebAssembly. Or you can have interfaces, or you can have separate projects. Whatever level abstraction is what you want, you can choose, and we can offer that flexibility.
You're just trying to offer here, if you want them the least amount of overhead and ceremony, use this solution. But if you want to have more control, you're free to implement your own. Yeah,
that's right. And I think there's possibly even a longer term vision about how data loading can be made quite opinionated, so you don't even think about this at all. I think, Javier, you're starting to think about designing that, aren't you? Do you want to explain how that could work?
Yeah, so I think one of the most where I'm trying to go for is to live in a world where you actually don't even have to define an API because you're already having all that data loading logic within your component application. So why would you need to have a different mechanism when you are running on WebAssembly versus when you are running on server? And one of the ideas is somehow translate the data that you gather on the server to the WebAssembly piece, because on server, again, as we said, everything is very convenient. Your state and everything is on the server. You already have it there. Is the bridge on the client. And we already do some of this with pre-rendering, where we actually have a mechanism that allows you to persist a state and will automatically pick it up on the client and apply it. And the idea here would be that we can do that in more scenarios, not only during pre-rendering, and that we can do that more declaratively, like using an attribute or something like that you put on a piece of data in your component. We can handle the rest.
Yeah. I just wanted to suggest, like, as a really concrete illustration of that, you know how Blazor's got different lifecycles methods today, like on initialized async and all that stuff. Imagine, and there isn't, but imagine if there was one called on load data async or on loading async or something like that. And you put your data loading logic in there. But the magic of that particular one would be that it always runs on the server, regardless of whether you're WebAssembly or server. That particular method will always run on the server. So you can always talk to your database straight away and populate whatever parts of your component you want.
I love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just takes away an entire layer of your architecture.
Absolutely. Wow. And here's the other issue. If you're going to end up in WebAssembly land anyway, now you have to, as I said before, make an API layer, but that also involves data transfer objects. And, there are tools out there to help you with those things, but, have you guys thought about that at all? About,
in terms of like simplifying serialization or something?
Simplifying, yeah. So maybe creating DTOs for models with attributes or things like that.
I don't know that you would need to create DTOs quite as much. Like, imagine you're making your like products editor page or something. You want to load a collection of products from your database with EF or something. Yeah. And then you put some logic on loading async, which populates a list of product. Well, that's it. Like, there's no other code to write. There is no DTO. Your product is the DTO in a sense. Yeah. Like, you could load multiple things and they would all get loaded at once. I mean, you can still freely define classes that play a DTO-like role if you want, but you just wouldn't have to.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other way to put it is that whenever you are serializing graphs, you need to think about like back references and things like that. And part of you being an engineer is figuring out that, well, if I don't need to like have back reference to something, maybe I can just live with those. And as long as you keep things simple and JSON serializable, you should be good.
I got called to task once for taking the database table architecture, representing that as a class and sending it down as a DTO to and then they were simple tables, right? ID, first name, last name, email, whatever. But the criticism was somebody can nefariously, if they know that that you're basically representing the shape of the data, then they can nefariously inject things by making calls. But that seems to me that a good security is going to handle that. But I'm not sure. Have you ever heard that kind of thing before?
Yeah. So MVC has that. And if you look at MVC, there's an attribute that is called bind never that you can put on a property to essentially prevent that type of attack where like you're using your entity framework type and you're using an ID or a foreign key or something like that. I want to prevent someone from sending a post request and changing that. Yeah. That's the way you normally do. And
yeah, okay.
The other thing is that you normally also use the ID from the URL or something like that as the input for like keying things to your database, because that's where normally you have your authorization rules and everything else, and essentially avoid using the body for things that decide where things go.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you're really paranoid about it, you could create a map and, use GUIDs or something to send to the client and then map those to things in the database if you're really worried about it. But I think I think there's plenty of solutions out there to prevent that from happening these days.
In the end, I would say that it's perfectly fine to use DTOs, and it's actually what we recommend in like MVC and Web API in many cases, because you know the exact shape of your data.
Right.
We have attributes to make other things work, but if you can be explicit, it's a bit more work and a bit more ceremony, but in some cases it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Richard, do you have any more questions?
No, I think we've nailed this. Of course, it's still early days,
right.
So a lot of this, we can say it's all going to be phenomenal because you haven't had to build it yet.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for the preview coming, up and coming here. I'm definitely going to take it out for a spin, and I'll definitely talk about it on Blazor Train and show some demos and things. Guys, thank you for your continued awesomeness. There's no other way to say it. It's just awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for having us.
You're welcome. And we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.